Hello, this is Mrs. Reed, and this is lesson 5.5. Our objective for today: I can discover and apply the properties of parallelograms. A parallelogram is a quadrilateral with two pairs of parallel sides. Mark the quadrilateral EFGH as a parallelogram. So that means we need to make the opposite sides look parallel. So we're going to add this mark, which means parallel. So that is showing that the opposite sides of our parallelogram are parallel. Now the next thing we need to look at is the opposite angles. If you notice, the opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent. So the parallelogram opposite angle conjecture states the opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent. So we're going to go ahead and mark that on our figure on the left. So those two are congruent. And those two are congruent. Find the sum of the consecutive pairs of angles in the parallelogram EFGH. So take a moment here and fill in these four, please. So like E plus F would be angle E plus angle F, and then write that down here. So take a moment and fill those four in, please. So you should have gotten 180 for all four of those consecutive angles when added together. So our parallel consecutive angles conjecture states the consecutive angles of a parallelogram are supplementary, which means they add up to 180 degrees. Next, for step 3, we need to observe the opposite sides of the parallelogram. So if we notice, EF here is 11 centimeters, and HG here is also 11 centimeters. So we can mark those as congruent. So those are congruent. And then looking at the other side, this is 14.5, and this side is 14.5, so you can mark those as congruent as well by using the same number of hash marks. So the parallelogram opposite side conjecture states the opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent. Next, we need to draw on the diagonals and mark their intersection as M. So draw those in. And then mark the intersection point as M. Alright, next we need to measure all of them. So ME from here to here, I went ahead and measured that for us. It is 6 centimeters. Next, MF, I measured that for us. That is 3.5 centimeters. And then M to G, which is 6 centimeters. And then lastly, MH, which is 3.5 centimeters. So then that means point M is the midpoint of the diagonals. And if you notice, ME is 6 centimeters and MG is 6 centimeters. So ME and MG, so those are congruent. So we're going to go ahead and mark those as congruent. So hash marks here. And then MF is 3.5 and MH is 3.5. So here and here, those are congruent to each other. So we're going to mark those congruent as well. So then the parallelogram diagonals conjecture states the diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other. That means to cut them in half. Alright, so now we are going to do some practice problems with our parallelograms. I'd like you to take a minute and try to figure out this problem here. They want us to figure out what angle R is. So take a moment and answer that question. The opposite angles in a parallelogram are congruent, so that means angle R is also 135 degrees. Take a moment and figure out what the missing information is here, please. Alright, so again, the opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent, so this missing side is 23. Go ahead and do this one, find the missing information. Consecutive angles in a parallelogram are supplementary, so angle D equals 180 minus 70, so D equals 110 degrees. See if you can find the missing information on this parallelogram here. Remember that this angle and this angle should add up to 180, so to find the missing information, we do 180 minus 60 minus 52, and then whatever is left over should be our answer, which is 68 degrees. Take a moment and this one here, use this information to figure out what the measure of ym would be. So they gave us km, which was 23.4, and we learned that the diagonals bisect each other, which means that ym and yk are congruent to each other. So to figure out what just half of this diagonal is, we would divide it by 2, which gives us 11.7. So ym equals 11.7. And then take a minute to figure out the missing information on this last one, please. So again, we can remember that this angle plus this whole angle should equal 180. So we do 180, subtract 55, subtract 62, and we're left with 63 degrees. And this concludes our lesson 5.5.